So, um, so today, um, in the meditation, I want to use an approach that I was taught early in my practice that I still find quite useful, which is kind of just dividing my thoughts into categories of thoughts of desire or craving, wanting, and thoughts of aversion or sort of negative thoughts. Um, and, people sometimes will dispute whether all our thoughts fall into these two categories. And, and it is true that there are some uh, thoughts that are altruistic, um, or thoughts that have, you know, pure motives behind them. Um, but I find generally there are few enough of them that I don't have to worry about it. Because if you can see all the grasping or wanting thoughts and let go of them, and if you can see all the aversive, negative thoughts and let go of them, you are going to be really happy. and it'll be great. So I think that's just a really useful way to practice rather than going, well, I don't know if this is really, it's like, no, just label it. This is a labeling practice, very simple. The challenge really is that when you notice the thought, that you don't build a story out of the thought, or even a story about the thought. Oh yeah, that was that thought. Yeah, but that I remember this. Oh, I shouldn't have. I think I will. Just the thing is to just just see it. Come back to the breath. Always the breath. I've been doing a lot of breath work lately. In fact, I think I'll do some right now. So to be more specific, and I will give this guidance as we're sitting, but just so you have the framework in your mind. The suggestion is that you start by bringing your attention to the breath, and you're aware of breathing in, you're aware of breathing out, just feeling that happening. And then when you realize, oh, I'm thinking, that you take like a very quick glance at the thought and see if you can label it as either, and I will typically say desire or aversion. You can come up with your own labels, but that's kind of the contrast we're looking for here: desire and aversion. And that can be a very subtle form of desire or a very subtle form of aversion. It's not necessarily I love chocolate or I hate so and so. It can be much more subtle than that. So that it requires a kind of subtlety of attention. Now, if it's not clear to you immediately, if you don't just immediately get like, okay, desire, and name it, then just come back to the breath. Don't linger thinking, well, is that really desire? Maybe that's aversion. I don't know. Could be. What if that's just another opportunity for like spacing out, right? So just quick glance, label, come back to the breath, settle back, relax, enjoy the breath. If there's one thing that Thich Nhat Hanh emphasized, it was to really enjoy the breath. And maybe we don't talk about that idea enough when we talk about being mindful of the breath. But there's a real subtle pleasure that comes from just feeling body breathing. So let's begin. This will take about 20 minutes, just in case you're wondering how long we go. And I will ring a bell at the end. The starting point of meditation is always establishing posture. So feeling how you're holding your body. Some of us can sit with our legs crossed, others in a chair. Some people need to be lying down. The main thing is we want a posture that allows us to be still and to stay alert and relaxed. So we don't want to be restless or uncomfortable starting out. So just a general awareness of how you're holding your body, and then seeing if you can establish stillness. And this alone can be an interesting moment. With the eyes closed and the body still, to shift in our perception, no longer so outwardly focused. And that can even be disorienting if you're not used to it. Something you hadn't noticed can suddenly stand out, some sensation, some emotion, some feeling of stress or fatigue, or certainly something pleasant as well, a feeling of calm or contentment. And letting your attention then gather around the breath. What does it mean to be mindful of the breath? It can be done in different ways. What's most useful is to find what works for you. You can focus on a particular sensation at the nostrils or the belly. You can focus on the movement of the breath. Where does that start? Where does it end? You can follow the breath. Coming in, going out. Or you can just generally be aware that you're breathing. As Thich Nhat Hanh would say, breathing in, I know that I am breathing in. Breathing out, I know that I am breathing out. You might find in one meditation session that it's helpful to use more than one of these strategies. You might start with just that general awareness, and then after things have settled a bit, start to focus on more precise sensations. The breath can only be felt in the present moment. So when we are mindful of the breath, the mind is in the present moment by definition. Mindfulness of breath naturally calms the body. It naturally calms the mind. And these are the benefits of mindful breathing. As we are trying to pay attention to the breath, we might notice the mind has wandered, that the attention has wandered. In that moment, notice the nature of thought that has taken you away. Is it a thought of desire or a thought of aversion? A thought of wanting something or wanting to know something, wanting to do something, wanting to be somewhere. There's a desire, there's a thought of aversion, of not liking something, of judging something, wanting to get away from something, wanting to fix or change something. So in that very brief moment, noticing the type of thought, you can also name the thought as simply desire or aversion. And then gently come back to the sensations of breath. If it helps you to stay with the breath, you can also note the breath, just noting in, out, very softly in the mind with the movement of breath. Keep coming back to the breath. Each time you return to the breath, see if you can settle a little bit more. Now the wandering mind tends to agitate the body as well, agitate the emotional world. So when we see that wandering mind, we can breathe mindfully and release the sense again of settling body and mind. All right. So, a lot of things kind of came up for me as I was reflecting on how I wanted to talk about this morning. And I think I should probably start by trying to frame what we're talking about and what we've been talking about uh, in a recovery context, since this is a recovery group. I would call it a Buddhist recovery group. Um, so generally, the way I kind of arrived at this topic that we're working with today, and I've been working with mindfulness and then the Eightfold Path, is that I was in step 12 from my book, One Breath at a Time, gets to a point where we're talking about the breadth of practice and practicing these principles in all our affairs. Now that's the bigger context of this, that if we're talking about Buddhism in the context of recovery, then the question is, how do we practice Buddhist principles in all our affairs? And so that's what this is kind of trying to address specifically, because it can get very Buddhist, which, is just kind of, I mean, it's very much my orientation that I think probably the longer I'm sober, the more Buddhist and the less alcoholic I become. And that's not to say that, I'm still not very alcoholic. It's just maybe not quite as much. And I don't mean by that like I could ever drink. That's not what I'm talking. I'm talking about sort of my orientation. My orientation is more around Dharma than like, oh, what am I going to do? I got to avoid relapsing, kind of, because I see the Dharma as already protective of that. So then the question of what is the application of mindfulness in terms of practicing these principles in all our affairs? And what I think the first connection and most direct, maybe most important connection we can make is that addiction includes and is largely involved in shutting down our awareness, which can result in literally blacking out or OD, but barring even those extreme examples of shutting down our awareness, just numbing ourselves and detaching ourselves from our feelings, from our bodies, from our thoughts, from awareness in general, is part of the project of addiction. We're trying to get away, from everything that's unpleasant, and we're trying to create something that's pleasant, that's kind of artificial, right, through substance or other kind of abuse or an addiction. So mindfulness is the opposite of that, and it has several roles in that process. First of all, it has the role of making us encounter our experience, encounter our felt experience, encounter our body, encounter our mind, to see things clearly. Now that means that we are taking an opposite tack from the addictive impulse. The addictive impulse to get away from the unpleasant and grasp onto something pleasant. Now we're saying, I'm going to turn towards it, whatever it is, which is a huge challenge. And of course, that's one of the reasons we need 12 steps, not just one, to deal with everything that happens, all the repercussions of, oh, I'm going to actually recognize my life, my feelings, my felt experience. I'm going to deal with the practical level. I'm going to deal with the emotional level, with the spiritual level. But so mindfulness allows us to be present with all that But that's not enough, because if we were just being present with it, we'd probably go, oh, I can't stand this. There's a reason why I was drinking and using. I don't want to feel this stuff. I don't want to be. So, we have a program. You go to meetings and you get a sponsor and you learn different ways of being and relating to the world and turning it over, and all that work is about how to live with this new reality of being clean and sober. Mindfulness also, and as I kind of mentioned this in the guided meditation, also has this very healing quality we discover, and the breath itself very specifically. And I just really feel like I'm being, as they say, standing on the shoulders of Thich Nhat Hanh, talking about this, about how much for him mindfulness of the breath was not just simply, oh, I'm feeling my breath. It was much more than that. Very much a healing, a physical healing of letting the body be open and take in air and fully exhale. He even teaches practices that involve really making sure that you completely exhale. And so there's this physical healing, but then as we go through the teachings on mindfulness of breathing, very quickly there's this calming of the body that happens, right? And then there's a calming of the mind and an evoking and cultivating of the subtle, pleasant experience of being present, of being alive. That the book that I've been working with of his is just called Breathe, You Are Alive. And breathe it's breathe exclamation point, you are alive. Or maybe it's even I am alive. Anyway, there you go. It's about being alive. I know that part. And that, that exclamation point and the feeling of the title is being alive is a wondrous, beautiful thing. When we can tune in, when we can just be with it as a pure experience, when it's not, filtered through our resistance or our aversion or, our story, when it's just felt, and that's why, I took Nhat Hanh as such a sort of unique character in that he points us to the simplest things, and in his teachings, at times, if you are not with him, if you're kind of not getting him, you feel like you're listening to a kindergarten teacher. It's just like, oh yeah, there's a butterfly, whoop-de-doo, But when you're with him, and you get it, it's like, oh yeah, it is miraculous. It is beautiful. And so, mindfulness in a way is trying to get us back to this simpler way of being. One of the ways that we can think about the 4 foundations of mindfulness that we've been going through, and we're on the 3rd one officially today. This starts with body, and then there's feeling, the pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, and then there's mind. And then the 4th is dharmas or phenomena, and we'll take that up later. But one way I view this sort of process is as an evolutionary process. All living beings have bodies. And I'm not an expert on biology, so if there's an exception, please forgive me. But generally speaking, all living beings have bodies, and they all have feeling. So we know, like, amoebas move toward the pleasant and away from the unpleasant. And when they're not, in pleasant or unpleasant, presume they're just like floating around, not paying attention. Right? So that's pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, right? So all beings have that. Mind, consciousness, and the mind states that we experience. Now we're moving into just the realm of human. There might be some primates that have some of these qualities, but we're really moving into areas where Amoebas don't have, the complex emotions. They don't concentrate. That there's so so this this process of deepening mindfulness is, in a sense, moving into the higher centers of the brain. But note that as we do that, we keep coming back to the first foundation of mindfulness, back to the body, back to the breath. We're not really, with this practice, we're not really encouraged to necessarily hang out here. We want to notice what's going on in mind. We want to notice phenomena and dharmas. But what's always there for us is this simplest, most basic aspect of lived experience, the body, the breath. So that's my prelude for this topic. And now I'm going to go to my favorite, Bhikkhu Bodhi. So now we can look at, the kind of the particulars of this topic, which it can get more deep dharma, and it might not all seem. Well, I don't know what exactly I'm trying to get at. This comes out of somewhat of a scholarly teaching. So try to stay with it and see if you can relate to it on another level. So he says that this third foundation of mindfulness that he calls contemplation of the state of mind, which is kind of a key phrase, your mind state. With this foundation of mindfulness, we turn from a particular mental factor feeling to the general state of mind to which that factor belongs. So in other words, the second foundation, which is about pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, is part of the mind, is part of this mind contemplation. But now we're looking at sort of the whole of the mind. So to understand this, it's helpful to look at the Buddhist conception of the mind. Look out. Usually we think of the mind as an enduring faculty, remaining identical with itself through the succession of experiences, right? We think we have a mind. It's just this thing. It's just there as it is. It keeps going as one thing. And he says, though experience changes, the mind, which undergoes the changing experience, seems to remain the same, perhaps modified in certain ways, but still retaining its identity. However, in the Buddhist teaching, the notion of a permanent mental organ is rejected. The mind is regarded not as a lasting subject of thought, feeling, and volition, but a sequence of momentary mental acts, each distinct and discrete, their connections with one another causal rather than substantial. So the mind has a bunch of stuff that shows up in it. Stuff happens, and it keeps causing other stuff to happen. I hear the dog barking. Good example. I feel irritation. So that's the first foundation is hearing the dog barking. Second foundation is feeling aversion. Then the next thing that happens is I think, why doesn't the neighbor let the dog into the house, right? So that's this thought that comes. But then, because there's a whole history here, and we text with the neighbor, and we know she's the therapist, she needs to keep the dog outside because the dog will be barking and jumping on her when she's doing therapy. But then compassion arises, right? So and acceptance arises. So this whole process is all causal. One thing leads to another, right? But and this is all happening in mind, right? This is just, you know, one version of reality that I am interpreting. I'm focusing on it and then I'm interpreting it. I mean, if I were in the fourth jhana, I wouldn't even hear the dog barking, right? So it's only a problem if I'm not in the fourth jhana. So we see like, oh, this is, we see the construction of it. And this is what's really vital, right? When we see that the experience and the mental, that the whole like situation is created in the mind, like in terms of the interpretation of it. I mean, there's a reality of the situation, which is that, sound waves are moving through air, right? I accept, on the physical level, these things are happening. But when we realize, oh, this is like how I respond to this, how I act in this situation is is a choice, right? I can choose to react differently. Then, and that I see that it's, you know, constructed. The construction is the thing that shows me that it's not a self, because it could be a totally different uh, experience. Maybe I love the sound of dogs barking, right? Maybe I'm leading a class for pet owners and everybody's really happy to, oh, that dog, what kind of dog is that? And the reality of it just changes all depending on our point of view. So we see this is one of the ways that we break through from the idea of there being a self, and indeed of there being one understanding of reality. So I'll go through a couple more things that Bhikkhu Bodhi says. Um, and this is a little more technical. He says, a single act of consciousness is called a citta, C-I-T-T-A, which we shall render a state of mind. Each citta, each moment, act of consciousness, consists of many components, right? Which is sort of what we've been talking about, right? There's like the thought about the person and the experience and the judgment and the story and the memory. And so the chief, so each citta consists of many components, the chief of which is consciousness itself, the basic experiencing of the object. Now, here's where it gets confusing, if you're not already confused. Consciousness is also called citta, the name for the whole being given to its principal part. So along with consciousness, every citta contains a set of concomitants called cetasikas, mental factors. So the point is that the mind itself is called citta, and then everything within it is like a little citta. So these include feeling, perception, volition, the emotions. In short, all the mental functions except the primary knowing of the object are these cetasikas. So, all right. And really, again, not to get too caught up in the language of it and the concept of it, just to realize, oh yeah, there's a lot of different components to the mental experience. It's not just this one thing. Like I've got a mind and it's just doing this thing. No, it's like if I look closely with mindfulness, I see, oh, there's a sound, there's an impulse, there's a memory, there's a perception, there's a judgment. That all these things are going on at the same time. So let me get to his advice here. So he says, for practical purposes, it is sufficient to start to focus solely on three things: the mind with lust or without lust, which is desire, okay? The mind with aversion or the mind without aversion, or the mind with delusion or the mind without delusion. So greed, hatred, and delusion, right? So it's very difficult to be aware of delusion. By definition, if you're deluded, you don't know it. So I'm not sure how to deal with that thing. You got to kind of just get mindful. So that's why the meditation I led today, I said, pay attention to desire or aversion. So there is a plan behind my teaching. If you might have a hard time believing that. But here we go with what is really important to do. All the theory aside and understanding the components of the mind and all that aside, what Bhikkhu Bodhi says is that with this aspect of mindfulness, notice when there's desire and notice when there's aversion. And guess what? Let it go, right? Come back to the breath. So this was one of the first meditations that I learned, Buddhist meditations that I learned. And I found it, that is mindfulness of desire and aversion. And I found it striking, not to say shocking, to find how much of my thinking was driven by one or the other of these things. And of course, when we connect it to the Four Noble Truths and the cause of suffering, we realize, oh, well, desire and aversion, that's what the cause of suffering is. Because desire and aversion aren't really two different things, right? Desire is the wish to have something or to feel something, let's say. But that's the same as the wish to not feel what you're feeling right now. So it's desire and aversion, right? I want to get that thing means that I want to get away from not having that thing. It's only one thing, really. And the phrase I like for that is the second noble truth, the cause of suffering is wanting things to be different from the way they are. And that can be on an emotional level, on a physical level, a material level, a relationship level, a professional level, every possible level. Wanting things to be different from the way they are. And so if we're going to look at mindfulness of mind and say, oh, what can I get from this? I can say, in this moment, do I want things to be different from the way they are? Is that why I feel uncomfortable, And how can I change that? Which is, the critical question. And we know, like, oh, wait, if I'm trying to change the wish for things to be different from the way they are, am I wishing for myself not to be wishing for things to be different from the way? Am I just creating another layer of desire? And so this becomes we have to get very careful here. It's why sometimes meditation forms of meditation can become risky when we become oriented towards creating certain mind states. Like, oh, I'm going to meditate so that I can relax. Well, it sounds innocent enough. But if you find that you're really frustrated with how tense you are, and no matter how much you breathe, you still stay tense, well, you're striving, right? And you're not fulfilling the thing that must happen in order to end that suffering. And that is always letting go or cultivating loving kindness, basically. But those are partners. So, we enter into this, somewhat tricky area of practice, really important area of practice, observing the mind. There are other ways, and I may take this up and keep this going for Friday night. But because I think there are other ways to think about this process. I mean, I'll just see if I can sum this idea up. Sometimes we can be mindful of our body and mindful of our felt experience, but not see that what's dominating is a general mind state of desire or aversion, and kind of be like, well, I'm present, I'm mindful, and I'm not really caught up in a lot of, caught in something pleasant or unpleasant, but like I'm in a bad mood, like it's a bigger thing that we can sort of not see. When somebody says to you, I think you're really like in a bad place right now, and you're like, I'm fine. I'm not bothered, but you are, and you're just not seeing it because you're kind of not being mindful of the right thing. Anyway, I'll just open it up for a few minutes of conversation. If anybody wants to comment. Oh, hello. Hi, Jasmine.
Hi, Kevin. Thank you for the meditation. And I do one of your meditations every morning, so thank you for that as well.
Very nice.
I just wondered, a kind of open question, really. You mentioned about the delusion and not delusion, and how can we possibly know that? And for me, it kind of came to mind that when I'm not sure whether the mind is making something up or not, it is kind of, and the only thing I know is that I am sat here listening to this and breathing and drinking tea. That's the only thing, I guess, that I do know, and whatever else is going on in my mind might be true and might not be true, so often isn't. And I wondered if it's kind of being aware of that potential delusion, I guess. Don't know. I'm not looking for an answer.
Okay, good. But I think it's a good, general point that kind of, well, I guess what comes to mind for me is we need to cultivate mindfulness to become more and more subtle, and that's the path, in a way, is not just to be aware, like, oh, there's a thought, or there's my toe hurts, or I'm mindful of my breath, but that we become more and more attuned. And as we become more attuned, then maybe we can be aware that, oh, we're tipping into delusion. Yeah. I mean, sort of by definition, if you're mindful, you are not deluded, but you could be deluded about being mindful. That is to say, you could think you were being mindful when you weren't, which has been my experience, especially when I was drinking. I could think, oh, I'm being mindful, and I wasn't. So
I like what you said about the whole, you're mindful, you're present, and there's nothing particularly going on, but there's this kind of weight of something. And I definitely experienced that. And also particularly hormonally, I think, as well, because there's kind of chemicals running around,
right,
which you can't do anything about, and it's natural.
Yeah.
But you feel,
Yeah.
And but that's still being mindful of that, and all of it's okay. You doesn't feel it. He doesn't necessarily feel it, but it's just.
Yeah. The thing is, you can be mindful of the wrong thing, in the sense of kind of, oh, you're creating suffering. Like, you can be mindful of the fact that you're stepping on, bugs on the ground, and it's like, well, I'm harming them but I'm being mindful, or, uh, you know, uh, or as you say, you could be mindful of one aspect of your experience while something else is going on that you're just ignoring. So mindfulness really implies also that you're paying attention to the right thing, and like another challenge in the process. Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks. Julie, hello.
Good morning, everybody. Two things come to mind. I love the meditation. Of course, I always love your Dharma teachings, and I enjoy the Sangha so much, and it's a vital part of my life. So thank you so much. Two things come to mind. I am a food addict. I am not free from my addiction, and I appreciate your reminding me that our thoughts are really made up of a lot of component parts. It is when I see my thought as this one big solid thing that feels like it's a steamroller steamrolling me, and I cannot, I can't be with that. And when I remember to break it down into its component parts, it's less a big hairy monster, and it is more approachable for me to have space with it and make a different decision. So that the whole component issue of a thought was really a helpful reminder, and I thank you for that. The other thing that came to mind, and you actually, I think, addressed it, but when you were talking about the dog barking, and I think I heard you say that it's only not a problem if we're in the fourth jhana. And what came to my mind is it's not a problem if you don't see it as a problem. You don't
Right.
have to be in the fourth jhana. You can, if it's, it's again, and you talked about reframing and a different perspective, but Tara Brach, I learned from her years ago about using the phraseology, or maybe it was Pema, I can't remember, using the word problem. And if we reframe the word problem, we can see things. It's helpful for me with a new perspective. So dog barking equals problem. But dog barking doesn't equal problem for me.
I,
I enjoy the dog barking. Anyway, that's what came to me. It's like, no, I don't have to be in the fourth jhana. I just have
yeah,
to not see it as a problem.
no, what I said actually, no, I totally agree with you. What I said actually, and this is kind of a technical question, is that I wouldn't be able to hear it if I were in the
Right.
fourth jhana. So that's, because supposedly in the fourth jhana you can't hear anything. So,
Right. I
but
also thought I heard you say the other thing, and I misheard, and that's
but
okay.
but you're absolutely right. It's because, and it's so interesting, and this is why Vedana, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, is conditioned. Like the dog barks multiple times during the day. There are only certain times when I find myself, when I find it unpleasant. There are other times when I don't notice it, so it's neutral, or it's just kind of like, it's not, well, mostly it's neutral. It's rare, uh, mostly not pleasant, but it could be pleasant, as you said, exactly. So that's completely conditioned, is how we are the experience of Vedana. Yeah. Unfortunately, even when we try to change whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, it doesn't automatically happen. Yeah. I mean, it's good to know that. I mean, because really what you're talking about is kind of the reframing I would put under the fourth foundation of mindfulness. Like it's a Dharma view, and that can be very freeing. But sometimes the Vedana is so intense that we can't, uh, you know, that the Dharma perspective doesn't kind of break through. Anyway, um, Jimmy, hello.
Hello, Kevin. Thanks for the meditation and the Dharma talk. What kind of kept coming up for me during the meditation, I think my mind and my body actually has a desire for oxygen when it's breathing on the inhale, and
Right.
has an aversion to these carbon dioxide buildup within. So I was wondering if you could speak to healthy desires and healthy aversions. Because when it comes down to it, I'm just so focusing on the breath. And it seems like a healthy desire and a healthy aversion.
Right.
So
there is a positive form of desire in Buddhism. It's called chanda, chanda, as opposed to the unhealthy form of desire, which is called tanha. So tanha. So chanda is like the altruistic or spiritual aspiration. When it comes to the body, it's a really, really an interesting question, and I'm not sure I have an answer. Because certainly to say that it almost becomes a theoretical question. Certainly keeping the body alive sounds like a skillful, wise thing to do. So I won't argue with you that that's a positive. We'll put that under chanda. It can, where it can be unpleasant. It can be unpleasant. Maybe not. It might not be a form of desire or aversion, but it can be an unpleasant experience when we don't have enough air, right? Or when we are holding the breath for too long. And so the impulse then can feel like a grasping, but it's not really causing suffering. I don't really have an answer. I'll just agree with you. Thank you. Abraham, hello.
Hi, Kevin. Hi, Sangha. I really enjoy meditating around aversion and desire. Usually, sometimes I have an aversion to it, but mostly I do because I learn so much from it. The question of ignorance or delusion, I find interesting because if I am really, really desiring something and not knowing that, that's delusion. If I'm really, really hating something or have some aversion to something and I'm making all kinds of reactions to it, and I don't know it. I'm not aware of myself. That's my delusion.
Yeah.
So when the Buddha said, Ananda, my back is hurting, can you teach tonight? He was expressing a desire. Or if he said, this is a really pleasant grove, this would be a good place to teach, let's stop here. That's a desire. So we're talking about desires that are wholesome, and we're talking about noticing the desire, because if desires go out of control, that's when I find like I'm in danger. When aversion goes out of control, when I'm not aware of what I'm doing with my aversion, that's when I'm in danger.
Right.
So for me, it's an education to spend time with it.
Right.
Just wanted to say that. Thanks.
I think you're exactly right. I think so. First of all, I think the first point you're making, I think, is a really important one too. That desire and aversion are actually come out of ignorance. So ignorance or delusion, right? So that's like the primal impulse. And we see this in the description of dependent origination, which is the whole 12-step process that resolves or comes to suffering. It's the more complex way of understanding how suffering arises. It starts with ignorance, and so it starts with this misunderstanding, this not understanding that desire and aversion lead to suffering. That the delusion or the ignorance is that if I act on my desire or my aversion, that I will find happiness. And so that's the primal mistake that we make. I think that was the main thing that came up. Like, I mean, I know that's what you're saying, and I think it is really worth seeing that. It's and so in a way, I guess what we're saying then is, if we kind of reverse engineer our craving in a moment of craving, we can ask ourselves, what is it that I am believing? And what am I believing that acting on this impulse is going to solve, and thereby undermine our, because if we ask that question, presumably the answer is, oh, I'm believing that something is going to happen that is clearly not going to happen. I'm believing that if I get this car or this relationship or this trip to Hawaii, that's going to resolve my craving, and that I won't have craving anymore, that I'll be happy, I'll be fulfilled, and that suffering will end. And by seeing that, we're seeing the delusion, right? I'm seeing, oh, that's a deluded belief. It's not. So I don't need to act on that. Having this drink isn't going to make me happy. and so it's also asking us to look at karma, to look at the cause and effect process by which suffering happens, and again, to reverse engineer that. Great comment. Thank you very much. So we have run quite a bit over the traditional endpoint, official endpoint, which is obviously many people cannot or choose not to hang out after an hour, which I can appreciate. Having tried to sit through a retreat a couple of weeks ago online for the first time in these 2 years, I was like, oh, this is horrible. I don't like sitting here staring at these people trying to talk to me. Like, ugh. So I appreciate that you guys show up, and I hope it's, I try to make it not boring, because I think that's the thing that kills me about watching stuff online. It's like, if it's boring. So maybe my goofiness helps you to not be bored, and thereby enjoy some Dharma. Not sure that's a good enough excuse for my behavior, but it's what I've got today. So thanks, you guys. I am going to speak tonight at the Napa Valley Insight group at 7:00 Pacific time. And I'm going to talk about Thich Nhat Hanh and who knows what else, something about him and his teachings. So if you want to get that. Otherwise, I'll be back here Friday night on this Zoom channel. So be well. Thank you, guys.